Um, yeah, I think there are a few things. Most of them probably don't come from my research. I've only done a little bit of work on residential design, and I think one of the this is not an answer to your question, but I'll just say that one of the things the thing that I found most surprising about the research that I've done on people's responses to residential designs. This was a VR study. Well, maybe I should give you a little bit of detail of the study. We designed some different styles of residence in VR, and then we recruited people who were in the housing market looking for places to live to walk through these places, and we measured their bodies as we do, and we asked them lots of questions, and we tracked where they went. And then at the end of the whole thing, we asked them, if you could buy any one of these three houses, which one would you buy? And the houses were, we had a Frank Lloyd Wright design, a Sarah Suzanka design, who Sarah Suzanka is an American architect who I think she became well known because of a book that she wrote called The Not So Big House, with the design philosophy that it wasn't the square foot formula that determined how successful a house was. It was how well it was put together and functional. So that was one of the houses. And then the third one was this kind of typical, we called it a McMansion design, but it wasn't really a McMansion, but it was a typical suburban townhouse in Milton. It was an actual structure. And our measurements told us that there was a clear winner, which was the Suzanka design, that had the right kinds of biometrics, that people generally gave the right kinds of answers to questions about the way that they would use the space, and their patterns of movement through the space were most encouraging. But when we put the question to them, most people said, I choose the Milton townhouse. And what it taught me was the power of social norms, and especially in the qualitative data, they just said things like, well, this is the kind of house that my friends would expect me to buy, that I would, if I had, say, the Frank Lloyd Wright house. They didn't know it was Frank, well, they probably figured it out, but they said if I had this house, my friends would just think I was weird, like, why did you buy this crazy designer house?
Right.
So social norms are really powerful. And that's a little bit of a tangent to the question you asked, which is, what are the good principles to use in residential design? I think some of the things that I've learned from my work that have real power in successful residential design have to do even with basic things like the shapes of spaces. So there's a duality that we've talked about in environmental psychology since at least the 1970s. This started to be bandied about, the duality of prospect and refuge. So what we like to have in spaces, and this is true at any scale, including inside our homes, is that we like to have positions where we can feel some protection. Which seems a little bit odd to think of. This is inside your home, but still, even there, we want that feeling of being kind of enshrouded. Maybe is not the best word, but now I've used it. Enshrouded by the protective arms of something, but at the same time, we have some views about what's going on in the space. If you've got a space where you can't get those kinds of dualities working really well, then that's going to be an uncomfortable space. Things like legibility of the space, and coherence, how well things kind of fit together. Some of which you can do with just the arrangement of things, lighting, floor covering. All of those things can have an impact as well on how a space is partitioned mentally. Views of nature is kind of an obvious one. I mean, that's depending on your circumstances, that can be hard to get. But even if it's a modest representation of nature that you can manage to find a way to have those kinds of views outside your windows. And I know even that's kind of challenging, especially in high density, but that's going to make for a more successful residence. People talk about color a lot as if we understand it, but we don't. We know almost nothing about how color works, in spite of what the glossy design magazines will tell you. We know a bit more about pattern, and the same kinds of things that I mentioned in the context of building facades, I think are also true about the use of patterns, curvature in in residential settings. Yeah, there's a basic set of principles that I think we do have some notion of how they work in those kinds of interiors. And there's, as I'm repeating in boring fashion, there's still a ton that we don't know about
For sure.
how this works.
Yeah, no, that's fascinating. I guess just a follow up to kind of get a overall encompassing understanding of all of this is, what would you say is the significance between space